Bismillah. Welcome to Harvard Club of the UAE, Harvard Club of Egypt, and the Oxbridge and Cambridge Societies event on the post-COVID impact and outcomes across MENA and the GCC. Before we begin, some quick requests. Please keep yourself on mute and please turn off your video except for the speakers. COVID-19 has led us all to cancel many events and plans, but it has also brought us together. It has also led to so many webinars as brands and businesses seek to remain relevant and help us make sense of these uncertain times. As alumni communities, we thought it would be nice to connect on a more human level. We also felt that we could all learn from each other by sharing our views on what will be the impact and outcomes for us across our region and how we can see silver linings. Today, we have the opportunity to hear reflections and thoughts regarding our region from fellow alumni who are all specialists in their respective sectors. Let me quickly run through the program. After our welcome, we will invite each panelist to speak and share their thoughts and reflections for their sector. Panelists will be speaking for about 5 minutes each. We'll also be conducting some Zoom polls during that time, so for some quick information from you, including what you'd like to see as topics for future webinars. Thereafter, we will have a moderated Q&A, and then we will have some closing remarks. If you have questions, please type them into the chat box, and Lila, who will moderate the Q&A, will see what we can respond to. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panel, who are all alumni of our distinguished alma maters. But before we get started, I'd like to request Mohammed, President of the Harvard Club of Egypt, to say a few words. Mohammed?
Thank you, Sajida. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Cairo, Egypt. I hope you all in the best of your health and safety. It's my sincere pleasure to welcome you all today. Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge in the MENA region. It's a great to be here with you all discussing the impact and outcomes of the COVID-19 in the MENA region. I personally find this webinar as an opportunity for all of us, for partnerships to align and to highlight our added value towards the larger and the bigger regional society. I hope we can formulate a collective recommendations and start building it while giving our governments the support. We encourage you all to share your insights and reflections with us. Thank you all for being with us today, and back to Sajida.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our alumni panel. Each of them has been asked to reflect on the post-COVID outcomes and impact across the MENA and GCC based on their respective sector. I also want to add that as Harvard Club of the UAE, we are very pleased to collaborate with Harvard Club of Egypt for the first time and to continue our collaboration with the Oxbridge and Society. Now, on to our panelists. Our first panelist is Ruqayya Abbas Al-Balushi, who is also our most recent alumni. Ruqayya just graduated and enjoyed Harvard's first ever virtual commencement. Mabruk again, Ruqayya. Ruqayya completed her master's degree in international relations from Harvard University and will share her perspective vis-a-vis the government sector. Ruqayya, over to you.
Thank you, Sajida, for the wonderful welcome to the Harvard Club UAE. You've been welcoming so far since my journey started with the Harvard Club in the UAE. So thank you for that. I'm honored to be a part of this panel discussion today, and hope many panel and discussions to come in the future. I am actually head of international relations at the General Secretariat of the Cabinet in the UAE, and working at the General Secretariat, we have a great visibility on the overall government in the UAE. And since the pandemic started, our response to COVID-19 has been central, has been fast, and has been systematic, with the overview and support of our leadership, monitoring it closely. So in terms of government level, we see that digital infrastructure has actually worked tremendously throughout the past period. 20 years ago, the UAE started its digital transformation And today we can actually see the impact of that investment in building strong infrastructure. The UAE cabinet was fully functioning during the pandemic through ongoing cabinet meeting, issuing decrees and coordinating between its various governmental bodies without any disruption. Actually, Secretary General of the UAE cabinet, His Excellency Abdullah bin Bog, keep referring to the past 3 months being the busiest period he witnessed as Secretary General, as through issuing cabinet decrees, revisiting laws and regulations in such great speed and agility with less a bureaucratic approach. So we can see that post-COVID, governments are going to adopt more of virtual sort of model and approach. If we look at education, distance education will be permanent further to the education system here in the UAE and MENA and the world even. The regional e-learning market is expected to grow by 15.2 in the coming 3 years. And education actually received the highest budget allocated from the government. In the UAE is 14.8, and the budget allocation for the future is going to be more evolving around the education technology, from the security to building internet capabilities and so on. So the value of UAE's education technology market alone forecasted to be by 40 billion by the year 2022, as per by Future Foundation. And then we move into the sector of health sector in the UAE. It proved to be really strong. It proved the strength of it facing the pandemic, its resilience and its readiness as well. So there is a lot of lesson learned through this experience that need to be accumulated for the post-pandemic, post-COVID-19. There is also need to come up with more innovative future solutions for preventive health services. We need to harness smart technology such as blockchain, artificial intelligence, and big data analysis. And when it comes to actually predictive model for hospital management in the future. The public-private partnership is key when it comes to the health sector, supporting research and development, specialized in pandemics and epidemics for the future. This is also one of the areas that we need to focus post-COVID-19. In terms of, yes, we are in lockdown. We see countries closing their borders. However, the collective collaboration will eliminate fear of nationalistic, troublesome future, as well as it will contribute to restoring the economy much faster and stronger. As foreseen in some scenarios, that pandemics are going to be part of our reality in the future, and we require to coexist with it. Therefore, building bridges between countries, opening trade, and also connecting between scientists, data analysis, policymakers is crucial moving forward into the future. So looking into future of governments, government proved to be at the heart of response to fight the pandemic, especially government when they were more central in their response, it was more decisive and effective manner. Last month, the UAE government hosted virtual meetings across all of its entities and ministries discussing the current situation and how to move forward. Towards a future with more resilient and agility. In light to the meeting, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Prime Minister of the UAE, has directed to conduct a complete reform and merger across the ministries and federal entities. So government, we must seize this opportunity, construct itself in a way more resilient and durable to outlive future pandemics. So I'll just close it with this last remark is the future post-COVID will be shaped by the decision we take today. Therefore, decision required to be centered with best interest of the future of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you, Rokhaya. Indeed, the future will be decided by the decisions we make today, as well as I think, stepping up to accept the challenges and being more agile. So thank you for that insight into the wonderful workings of our government. And truly, it has been in many ways a much busier time and probably also more productive in some ways. So thank you again, Rokhaya. Our next panelist is Kaveh Vaseli. Kaveh is a Harvard Kennedy School alum who will share his perspective vis-a-vis the IT sector. Kaveh?
There we go. Thank you very, very much, Sajida. It's always a pleasure and an honor to participate in these things. And Rokhaya, Thank you for that opening and the perfect segue into a talk about technology and data. So very, very quickly, I think most of the impacts, and they have been massive impacts on technology and the IT sector, are fairly clear to all of us. We've been living it. So number one, obviously, we've been engaged in remote work and remote learning like we're doing right now. And this has not been a 50% increase, a 70% increase. Zoom by itself, which we're using now, has gone from about 30 million meeting participants a day, 10 million meeting participants a day to 300 million, a 30-fold increase in this period. And that's just Zoom, not counting, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, all the other technologies and tools that are being used to support this remote shift and the digital transformation that's part of it. So that's clearly been one massive impact. Second massive impact, Raya mentioned this, obviously, this is a pandemic, so the health sector has been heavily affected, and we've been relying on having to increase our capacity there, is we've also been doing a lot more monitoring and surveillance technology now, monitoring whether it's wearables for sort of medical things, or cameras, face recognition cameras, mask recognition cameras, cameras that can tell whether you've got a fever or not as you're walking. There's been a boon in the IoT hardware wearables space around what's needed. So these first two are, I think, fairly clear, very interesting, but not a surprise, not new. I think the most interesting impact that the COVID crisis has had on technology is the way it has accelerated the conversation around data, the way it has accelerated the conversation around gathering data, analyzing data, and protecting ourselves and protecting our privacy as we gather that data. And if you listen to the conversations, I think in general you find that things are moving in both directions with respect to our interest in data. We acknowledge that one of the big problems we had at the beginning is we did not have a lot of information. We did not have a lot of insights about exactly what was happening, how and where it was spreading, and so on. So we want to gather more data. We need to test folks. We need to monitor contacts, contact tracing. So very clearly there's an increased interest in gathering more data, in knowing more, in understanding more of what's going on in the world around us. This isn't new. This has obviously been a trend moving in this direction for sure, but it's accelerated it. But at the same time, you see a lot of backlash to this, a lot of concerns about location tracking versus contact tracing, a lot of concerns about medical records being made available and so on. And I'd like to simply suggest that the challenge before us and the biggest impacts, biggest changes I think that we'll see post-COVID are in the ways that we address this movement in both directions. Not unlike physics, where in the early 20th century, relativity theory was addressing the very, very large scale, and quantum theory was addressing the very, very small scale, and there was no unifying theory. And there is still no unifying theory. I think we have actually the same challenge when it comes to information and privacy. We understand that we need data for analysis and insights, and we understand that we need to protect data, but we think they are at odds with one another. And I'd like to suggest that they are not, and the challenge for the technology sector as a private sector, absolutely for the government and the public sector, and even for each of us as individuals, is having this dialogue around this unified theory, this unified approach that I would like to suggest says, don't keep yourselves from knowing and gathering data. Gather, know, analyze, develop the insights, but monitor and oversee the use. Do both things at great levels of visibility and transparency. Sort of a total visibility into the underlying data and what we can learn from it, and visibility into how it's being used. and this is a multi-sectoral individual to government effort. And what we decide to do with that is going to have the biggest impact on data and technology coming out of this crisis.
Thanks, Kaveh. You've given us much to think about, both how we should be thinking about gathering data, but really how we should be making data our friend. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges, is we don't necessarily always think of it as something that we can benefit from. It's something that is gathered and we're a bit more passive about it. So this is a very interesting perspective. Thank you again, Kaveh. And now we have Amal Enan. Amal is an HBS alum who is actually based out of Egypt. And so we welcome her in addition to our other speakers. And she's going to share a perspective via the finance sector. So Amal, over to you.
Thank you, Sajida. Thank you. It's a great honor to be among you all, and I'm happy this is the first collaboration that the Harvard Club of Egypt is doing with the Harvard Club of UAE, and I hope it's the start of many more. I think we get asked the question on, where is the money flowing all the time? How is COVID-19 impacting markets? It's been a really interesting time because we are unable, or it is unprecedented. It's uncharted territory, and I think that's the consensus at this point. Hard to make predictions. We can't look at previous crises and draw conclusions from there on how this will play out, because this has never played out before anywhere in the world, and we're all very new to it. So I think I'll just draw on some, broad themes that observations that we're seeing in the region, and some are not unique to us, and then we can dive deeper in the Q&A on things that are that people want to zoom in on, now that we know the audience is primarily also UAE with some Egypt, so at least we know which markets we want to cover a little bit more. But in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on the region's markets and the economies on the market, I think the primary concern in the beginning was just liquidity. Everyone was thinking cash flow, preserved cash flows. Liquidity is the most important thing. And that was the initial shock, because private sector doesn't like uncertainty. No one likes uncertainty. And guess who doesn't love uncertainty at all and will not embrace uncertainty? It's investors. So there was the initial pullback from investors. What is this? How are we going to deal with it? And now that it's across the board, we're relaxing and saying, okay, liquidity was an issue, cash flow. And then from there was how quickly companies adapted and which sectors were able to adapt faster than others. It's definitely not the same across the board. So there was the initial preserved liquidity, and then there's the mitigation and how to address changes, that there's nothing you can do about. And some of the most impacted sectors that we've seen were obviously tourism, services, shut down. That being said, it's important to note that economies have been impacted differently, and sectors have been impacted differently. So by that, I mean, what we're seeing in Dubai is very different from what we're seeing in Egypt. First, the spread of COVID was different, so Egypt was lagging. Egypt continues to be lagging. In the same way, Egypt is among the very few economies that the World Bank predicted that will not be witnessing a shrinkage this year. So the economy will still be growing by 3%. This is in contrast to what we're seeing in Dubai, where there's a lot more job losses are much higher, and there's more of an outbound of expats living in Dubai. Similarly, when it comes to sectors, there are winners and losers. There are also not everyone is losing from this situation. We are seeing some sectors that have really, this was a big window for them, and this was a big opportunity. Most of which, is, of course, as mentioned earlier, was the technology sector, fintech, the quick adoption that we have seen with users adopting tech solutions that were not as accessible before. E-commerce, now everyone is paying online, when there was so much resistance to putting just your credit card online, and that was a big barrier to businesses in Egypt. So we've seen how a lot of technology solutions are becoming adopted much faster, and which sectors are benefiting from that, those that were able to still retain their customer base through online channels. So it's important when looking at the markets to see what the fundamentals, what was their extreme reliance on. In some cases it was oil and gas, in Egypt it was tourism, and which ones had rising sectors that were able to capture the opportunity and make something out of it, and how quickly and for how long can they survive in that regard. So I think to kind of wrap it up, and we can go with the Q&A to see where people want to dive into more. But the interesting thing were, some of the interesting things were the disconnect, of course, between the stock market and the real economy that we've seen. So yes, this is not a time to go public, and IPOs have slowed down, but the impact in public markets has not been as strong as initially anticipated, and we've seen this globally, but it is even so in the Middle East. Private equity is, the deal flow is still strong, however, will take longer because private equity investors want to see, you know, your year-end results. How has this year going to impact your results? How this is going to impact valuation, and how quickly you will take companies to recover. Lastly, with VC, I think deal flow has continued to be very, very strong. And I remember someone quoting last week alone, there were $60 million of transactions in total being closed. So with VC, again, because of the accelerated adoption of technology solutions, we're seeing more liquidity and more deals being closed, and it hasn't slowed down. Thank you.
Thanks, Amal. So I'm going to take from that a silver lining and say I'm going to say that hopefully we see some traction and we see some things picking up as we become more accustomed to our new normal. So I'm going to take a silver lining from there and go forward. Thank you so much. I'd just like to remind everybody that if you have questions, please put them into the chat box so that we can have Q&A at the end, which Lila will moderate for us. So now I'd like to introduce everybody to Ali Draycott. Ali is actually a Cambridge alumni and is also she's the chair of the Oxford Society here, and we very much enjoy collaborating with them as well. So Ali is going to share her perspective via the education sector. So Ali, over to you.
Thank you, Sajida, and great to be collaborating again. I'm going to talk to you a bit about education. I sit on the Dubai Future Council for Education, which is an amazing initiative established by Sheikh Hamdan. It's one of 13 future councils. And I think, you know, referencing some of the work that the UAE and Dubai has been doing, this opportunity to sort of sit to one side and think future has been really, really helpful. Nevertheless, I think, as we all know, COVID-19 took everyone by surprise. And education really has been one of those sectors that has been required to change rapidly in response to COVID-19. Globally, UNESCO has reported that about 1.3 billion learners, about 70% of enrolled learners, have been affected by school closures across more than 150 countries. Some people will say that this is a welcome disruption. Many people argue that education systems that we have now are almost completely obsolete. They date back from several hundreds of years ago, based on a model essentially sort of designed by the British Empire, pre-industrial era, designed for people to come out with great handwriting, being able to read, excellent at arithmetic. Those were the skills that were needed to run the world, but they're not the skills that we need today. Schools have long been asking the question about how to make education more fit for purpose in terms of teaching people about machines of the future. You know, examinations that aren't about learning by rote, where kids can share and learn and use the internet. And really sort of thinking more about what's the education system of our time, but that's a much bigger question that I'll try and come back to. As part of that vision of reinventing education, the mission of getting every school and ideally every child connected online has been a really high profile ambition for many organisations. But what's happened in COVID-19, although this has in part been an outcome, we must remember that this has been a rushed transition. It's been a huge shift, but it's far from perfect. And I don't think any educational authority, you know, including the wonderful likes of KHDA, would even say that this has been online learning as it's meant to be. There's really been two problems. And I'm not really talking about the UAE here, I'm talking more globally, but we're seeing that there's a problem with access. The internet has become the new pen and paper of the classroom. And whilst high-income countries have access to online learning platforms, only about 50% of lower and middle-income countries do. Equally, within the United States, there's still several million children who haven't had access to online education, and that's a problem. In the UK, you've got families with only one iPad or laptop and multiple children. We cannot forget that we weren't immediately set up for it. I think there's also a question about quality. A lot of what's being delivered now has not been designed to be delivered online. You know, online learning, distance learning, e-learning is a pedagogy that has thousands of PhDs written about it. But really what's happened here is that many schools have had to deliver the same thing through a slightly different channel. This has caused, you know, stress at home. Parents are not prepared for it. They themselves are trying to get used to new ways of working. When we did our recent joint event with Harvard, I think it was about 40% of our alumni, which we polled, which about 150 people, all basically said that home education had been one of the most stressful things that they've done. So I suppose what I would like to say is that I think the last few months we shouldn't judge online learning by what's been going on. I think what's been fantastic is that people have continued to be able to learn during a pandemic. And this is very much continuing education in a crisis. Nevertheless, the changes that have taken place in the last couple of months probably would have taken years to happen. And really for education, this has been one massive unplanned experiment. And that's brought around really positive changes. We see in Lebanon, the ministry has collaborated with TV channels. In Saudi, I think 40% of people are saying that they've really enjoyed shifting online, and 27% intend to keep on using it. As we know now, this will give a boost to the digital education market. But really what I want the message to be is that we need a balanced response to this. We shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there are still lots of gaps that need to be filled in terms of well-being and cognitive skills. But really it's been a fantastic sort of sandbox of innovation. And I think there's no question that education is going to change forevermore.
Thanks, Ali. And you know, as someone else who works in the education sector, I have to say that I am very thrilled at the innovation and agility that education has, you know, proven. I think finally we're learning to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk when it comes to education. And what I also think is very exciting is that while learning from home and transitioning to online learning has not been without its challenges, it does point to the fact that these are ways that we need to be thinking about education in the future. We need to be more innovative about how we provide education opportunities for families so that it fits into families' lifestyles, but also enables, you know, future skill development. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A also and some further conversation about this. And thank you again, Ali. So all of you have given us much to consider and reflect upon. And now it's an exciting time for us because we'll be able to have some discussion and have some Q&A, which Lida will moderate. So let me start by asking Ruqayya, actually, as our first speaker. You mentioned international collaboration is key to moving forward. Can you perhaps give us some examples of how the UAE was able to contribute to international collaboration?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sajida. So basically, one of the key element that I keep referring to on and it's the global solidarity I think we can't turn a blind eye to global solidarity. If countries actually share and exchange resources, they can regain their strength much faster. For example, the UAE been lending tremendous support for other countries during this time, shipping more than 400 tons of medical aid and PPE supplies to more than 43 countries around the world. And also it's interesting, like I always keep telling that UAE was known being a hub for tourism and economy, and suddenly it's transformed itself to be a hub for humanitarian aid during the past period, and to show global solidarity for the rest of the world. The International Humanitarian City in the UAE was used as the main distribution point for the WHO. More than 132 shipments have been actually used from the point of the UAE. So this is like, we need to keep in mind, we need to continue collaborate, the collective collaboration have been there for 100 years, not just because we looked our borders, we step away from it and we don't build and capitalize on it. Another point is science diplomacy. It's something that we need to keep in mind as well. We have seen countries collaborating during the past period, and we need to see more of that, scientists sharing data and collective solutions for future epidemics. This is something that a bridge that need to be built between different countries and nations. Thank you, Sajida.
Thank you, Ruqayyah. That's a really great perspective. And it's very important to highlight the humanitarian work that the country's been doing. So thank you for bringing that to our attention again. Laila, over to you.
Sure, thank you, Sajida. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to moderate the Q&A session of the panel today. The next question is for Kaveh. How can messaging to the public help increase acceptance of using data, specifically around contact tracing? What are the messages that tech companies and governments can be giving to make it really clear to the public what is the best use? You're muted. I don't know if the host needs to unmute you. There we go.
Thank you. Yeah, I needed the host to help out there. That's an excellent question. Look, I think there are a couple of things that need to come through in the messaging. And of course, it's important that they be true. So they may also require some actual changes in the way we think and some policy changes. And this is where the tight partnership with governments comes in. But let's talk about the contact tracing, for example. The technology underlying contact tracing is such that it can be completely protective of privacy. The way it actually works is our devices have Bluetooth mechanisms, and Bluetooth can recognize other Bluetooth. So the lowest impact way of contact tracing is to, and most of the countries that have done it this way, is that my phone, when it comes within a certain distance range of another phone with Bluetooth turned on, for a certain period of time, will register the device number ID of that phone, period. And it will register it locally on my phone. Having done so, no one knows where we made contact, nor does any central data store have that information. It's simply sitting on my phone. And the way it can be used is if I later test positive, then the authorities can take my phone and anonymously send alerts to every other phone that was in contact with mine, let them know they were in contact with someone who tested positive. There are often creative ways to protect privacy and still share information and develop insights about what's going on. We can use aggregations of that contact tracing to build network effects and figure out who are the super spreaders, how much contact have they been in, and so on. There's a lot of interesting stuff that can be done. So it's really important when we talk about some of these things that we're making clear a couple of things. One is the ways in which privacy can be protected, like the example I just gave you, but also there are many, many mechanisms for providing this type of personal sovereignty over the data. we have this conversation about personal sovereignty around data in marketing all the time. Yeah, there's a whole movement suggesting that I, as an individual, may have no problem with my personal data being used in certain ways for certain purposes if I have agreed to let it be used as such. Yeah, and I'm aware of it, especially if I can benefit from its use, including, being paid for it. So if we can wrap our heads around some of the strategies to get individuals engaged in understanding what's actually happening, A, messaging around that, like the example I just gave. B, promoting personal sovereignty so that we have more choices about how and where the data is being used and can also benefit from it. And then I think finally, we need to be willing in the background to make just as visible and transparent the monitoring of the use. I think if I knew that I could go check a website and see every piece of my data that has been collected and is out there and who's using it, I could basically go and say, I don't want it used that way, I want it used this way, and we could have a conversation around it. Right? So I think, if we're willing to take a good hard look at how we monitor the use, then we can communicate clearly all of the pros and cons of them, create this dialogue around it, and in general, make it not such a scary, foreign, black box thing, and instead all be interacting with the fact that we have our information out there. Yep. My favorite sort of point in this conversation is, I'm probably the oldest person on this panel, but in general, there are no teenagers sitting here, and I've got some teenagers at home. They're not remotely as concerned about their information being shared as we are, because they share it voluntarily, so much more than we ever did. There's a generational shift also happening, and we can watch and see what happens when people, sort of get comfortable with messaging how data, with talking about how their data is being used. And I think we can simply message the facts about it, and it would make everything a little smoother.
Thank you so much for that really interesting insight. And we've prompted some comments and additional questions on the Zoom chat. So I do encourage everyone to post your questions there. We also have a few questions that were emailed before. And the next question is for Ruqayyah, actually following up on some of Kave's remarks. What are some of the more exciting potentials for public-private partnerships that you see from the government point of view? Kaveh just alluded to some of the tech partnerships regarding data privacy, but what are you seeing in a post-COVID world as areas where governments and the private sector are really coming together or should be really coming together?
Yeah, actually, in one of the areas that we see government and the private sector working together is research and development. It's an area that is untapped and not in high percentage in the UAE, and I see more of it moving forward in the future. Another aspect is also in terms of education. I think both sectors need to work together collectively to achieve the goal. So these are the two main areas as for now that I can see. Government should shape its policies to adopt the collaboration with the private sector as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Next question is for Amal. Where do you, and keeping in mind that we have participants and an audience from UAE and Egypt, as you mentioned, where are you seeing the rush to safety? And how is that going to potentially change the economic dynamics in the UAE or in Egypt?
It's interesting to talk about safety since I don't think anyone feels safe today or right now, right? Again, I think I'm not sure whether the question means towards safer assets. Right, yeah. Well, this is a time where you would think cash is king, right? So it's just hold on to your cash. And I'm not giving investment advice. Just hold on to whatever you feel safer to. If it's your blanket, just hold on to that. But this is also a time where, you know, again, look closely at the markets that you understand, where you believe you have information that it's your information and your access to information that makes you feel comfortable. And because you will find gems today, right? We are seeing that in the beginning, there was a massive market correction in the US. You know, when market corrections happen, these are the sort of events that investors are waiting for, so that they can, you know, catch good assets at a better price. But then people get scared, and then they don't buy, and they hold on to their cash, and then you miss that window. So my take is more, there is nothing there. Safety is now going to be tangible. Safety is a perception at this point. And we have to be aware that it's been changing week to week, right? When at the beginning, you must have been thinking, I can't wait to get on a flight again. I can't wait to go to X restaurant again. And if asked the same question today, it'd be like, I don't know if I'm ready to actually travel internationally. And that question changes from week to week. A lot of it depends on, as some people have already said, on government measures. And some governments have really been very proactive with their mitigation. And these are the sort of things that are making people feel safer. And so I think this is a question that changes week by week. It is highly dependent on sentiment, because it's a perception. Safety is a perception. And knowledge and access to information are really key when weighing in on these decisions.
Excellent. Okay, so the next question is for Ali, and then we'll come back to Ruqayya. Ali, what support is being given to teachers as they make the transition to online and distance learning? And following on from that question, how permanent do we see these shifts? And what are the biggest ways that education might be reinvented? What changes are really going to stick? And I think I can, the host has to unmute you. There we go.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Yes, great question. I think for me, in terms of the support that's being offered for teachers, I think we have to think about it in almost two steps. So in terms of what's going on in the crisis now, it's been incredible to see how organizations globally have stepped in terms of offering free resources. Dubai Future Foundation, which Ruqayya has mentioned, has pulled together a fantastic load of free resources. There's also been, I mean, I'm speaking, I have to say, about the UAE, but UNESCO's put together a fantastic Wikipedia that shares resources for teachers. KHDA themselves have created a platform called In This Together, which is about bringing together both free resources for parents, teachers, and students, and also has certified training for teachers. So, I mean, there's a short-term piece, because teachers are really taking the brunt of this. I mean, no one's had to change more, I think, than teachers. So there's a short-term piece that's happening, but longer term, there will be more planned changes. So the UAE, for the first time, has made online education something that's formally recognized by the Ministry of Education. And that's going to bring around a change in regulations, the change in which assessments are going to be done. And that's going to be a much longer, well thought out policy piece, which will provide many more guidelines for teachers in terms of assessments. We don't have the details of those just yet. I think everyone's still looking at what the academic year exactly is going to look like. There needs to be a time for reflection in terms of learning what's best. But that's certainly coming. So there's sort of two parts to it. In terms of what we're sort of going to think is going to stick, for me, you know, this is a scenario that's kind of out there, and this is a very personal view, I must add. But I think the biggest change that we're going to see is that you can learn anytime, anywhere, and almost, if you unbundle schools from the bricks and mortar of real estate, essentially, and say you can learn anytime, anywhere, you begin to see the idea of the sharing economy. So, you know, the likes that we have with ClassPass with gyms and Uber with cars and Airbnb with hotels or whatever, with property, you potentially could see that with teachers. So you see an opportunity where you can be taught by any teacher anywhere in the world on demand in a much more self-directed way. So I hate the words Uberization of learning, but I think, you know, actually this idea of bringing a platform to education where people can pick and choose their own is potentially a reality that we couldn't have seen before. You know, what's to say that you only need one geography teacher in the world who teaches everyone. I mean, I'm taking it to extremes, but yeah, that's where I see the biggest change potentially happening.
Very interesting. So coming to Ruqayya, sorry, just a second. There was a question on the chat about science diplomacy. So to what extent do we think, so the question is, in terms of international relations, would we say the global community is ready to give policy direction on scientific collaboration? I guess to be more specific, in what ways, if you can speak to it, is the UAE collaborating with the global scientific community?
Yeah, this is, thank you for the question. So I think I recently wrote an article actually specifically on science diplomacy. I think it's a new power that we need to utilize as an international relation, specifically build that bridge between countries. Also, there is one term that is used, it's the flat world. You know, it's making sure that resources and technology is actually available for everyone across the world. We start to see there is a huge gap and inequality when it comes from our different regions and different countries, especially with the second wave hitting of COVID-19. You know, in various countries, we see that there will be a deep inequality that we will be witnessing soon. However, being able to share resources between countries, it's important. In terms of specifically what the UAE is doing on that, it's an area that actually we need to invest in it more. Specifically to COVID-19 was that there has been some of the UAE students who are studying or continuing their education in medicine, they decided and they chose actually voluntarily to stay in the country where they're receiving education, such as France, US, Canada, and they were actually in the front line with their colleagues from those countries, and they did it that voluntarily just because they are morally obliged to do so. And another collaboration happened between UAE and India. There has been there was a collaboration of 103 members of the medical staff from India joining UAE in the front line to be able to cater to the intensity of the cases that we witnessed in the past month. So science diplomacy is taking place. We need to do more. There has been another question on intellectual property as well. I think this could be a barrier from the past system, and moving forward to adopt new systems, new policies, more agile and more openness to the world. That would be my answer.
That's very interesting. One more question from Ali, and then we'll go to Kaveh. Ali, a lot that has been noted, it's been noted, as you mentioned, that a lot of children don't have access to the internet or to devices. And in general, with the newness of online education, a lot of children are falling behind. So what might have been acceptable for one semester might become a looming problem as we look forward for an interrupted year, 2021. To what extent should this region be focused on making sure that the children that are falling behind are able to catch up? Or is that a question that shouldn't be addressed, and we should focus on how everyone is going to be re-leveled next year?
Goodness
and I've
me.
lost somewhere. Everyone moved around. Sorry, there you are.
That's quite a big question. I think I think there's, and on a case by, I think it has to be taken not only on a personal case by case basis, but I think we've also got to look at education as different years as well. So people at different stages in their journey have been affected differently by this move to more online. So I think you'll look at the impact on older students. That's not been as great. They're more familiar with online. They're better capable to do self-directed learning. But you can't get in a sand pit and move sand from one side to the sand pit to the other online, which is what a lot of kindergarten kids do for a lot of their development. So I think that there's going to be different gaps and different needs and different solutions at every level. In terms of people falling behind, I think the opportunity that we're now going to see with online education is actually, we're now going to be able to ask ourselves much bigger questions, which is, well, why does education have to only happen in term time? Why can't I go to school at night? Why can't I learn on the weekend? Why can't I do this? So when we've seen COVID-19 unbundle school from learning from the school, I think we're now going to be able to get to a system where we're going to unbundle education from this strict idea of 8 till 3 term time. So I hope that there will be more opportunities to learn anytime, anywhere, and therefore it's an open market, and children should be able to catch up regardless of what they've missed and when, if they're able to be more self-directed and have greater access.
Interesting, thank you. And now for Kaveh, so looking beyond COVID-19 and anticipating that there's going to be another crisis of some sort, whether it's a looming climate-related crisis or some other type of pandemic or something we can't imagine, how will governments prepare the big changes that they need to make in terms of use of technology to be shock-proof?
Well, I think there's again, we're sort of looking at the two sides of the conversation we were having. So clearly, I think the first thing that governments are starting to do now using technology is have in place the data gathering systems and the analytical systems to allow for that flexibility and resiliency. And I think some of what we've noticed is there are many, many government agencies that when this pandemic first hit, they realized that they had been moving a little too slow in getting just their sort of infrastructure set up, and they had no great way of quickly assessing what was going on. So economic agencies realizing they didn't have a good vision of the economic landscape, and they couldn't quickly answer a question such as, what just got impacted, which sectors just got impacted the most, and so on. So one of the things we're noticing is that, and again, Rahaya talked about this, that the budgets are being redirected to what I would describe as preparedness and resiliency and visibility. They're getting ready so that whatever the shakeup is, whether it's health with global climate change ramping up, we are expecting, environmental issues. We will continue to have economic ups and downs. And the first thing I think governments need to do is make sure that they've got a clear view of what's happening when it's happening, which means having systems in place and collecting the data and having operating models already in place where decision makers are using data. This is sort of about evidence-based policymaking, evidence-based decision-making at every level, becoming a little bit more operational so that when these things happen, you can get decision makers in a room, they can view the situation and start to make those decisions. I think that's the biggest thing I'm seeing governments do. And of course, in order to do that, they have to do a lot more collaboration, again, as everyone has been describing, whether it's on the educational front or with the flows of finances or just managing interactions in the public sector. Public-private interactions have to be more smooth. International collaboration has to be more smooth. So we need to also put a big focus on addressing how we respond to the insights that information we're collecting gives us? Yeah. Can we in fact collaborate and have a more international or regional response rather than a country by country response?
Excellent. The next question is for you, Amal. It's maybe a bit of a curveball. There was a question on the chat that referred to sustainability, talking about food security, but let's take that more broadly. Where do you see investors in the region thinking, how do you see them thinking about sectors that are sustainable?
So if we were to find the silver lining in this pandemic, it's definitely that it's brought sustainability at the center and at the very front of agendas for both policy leaders as well as business leaders alike, because we've all seen the disruption and we know we know the causes, right? Like whether it was the poor and decades of not properly investing in healthcare systems, taking climate change more seriously, food security most definitely, and how we are very vulnerable to crises and how it's really affecting the most vulnerable groups of society. It's lovely that we're all able to meet on a webinar and have intellectual debates and discussions, but we also live in markets where people have been vastly impacted in ways because they rely on daily income. And so from a sustainability point of view, I think, first of all, the healthcare sector has become increasingly important. And in Egypt, for example, the healthcare sector was fragile and it wasn't news to anyone. And now we're seeing how it's being, put under a lot of stress. But again, the silver lining is there's a lot of focus on health tech now. And how telemedicine it's not going to replace doctors, but how it's going to enable more access to larger groups of society, and how the shortage of supply across the region, and it's definitely not just Egypt, but how do we balance out the supply and demand? And so there's more focus on health tech and investing in these sectors that have been underserved. When it comes to food security, for sure, the supply chains have for businesses have been very disrupted at different points, whether it's on the distributor level, on the logistics level, and again, infrastructure played a huge role. And so new delivery methods have been, one of the things that I always give Egypt credit for is how we come up with workarounds. This is not working well, figure out another way. But the extent that we're able to institutionalize workarounds, to the extent that we can formalize them and scale these solutions, because it's not going to be a one-time thing. What we're seeing, there are a lot of views on whether it's this crisis L-shaped. Are we going to bounce back? When is the second wave? We're already seeing second waves in different continents, and so the silver lining again is that sustainability has come into focus. There's much more light on it, and whether by sustainability we're talking environmental, food, healthcare. Solutions are coming about, but some of them are short-term because it's like, okay, this is a crisis. And initially it was, are we dealing with a 2-week crisis? Are we dealing with a 1-month crisis? And a lot of, even I was in denial about how long this will last, but we don't know when it's coming back and how, but what we do know is that we're vulnerable. And so a lot of the solutions that are coming out need to be scaled, need to be formalized, institutionalized. And funding going into that cannot be just short-term funding just to, cover up for the solution. And I think the benefit of some of the VC investment that is in the market now is that it is looking at these opportunities. It's looking at opportunities for healthcare. It's looking at opportunities for food security that are here to stay.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. So the first question is for Ali. You've emphasized the positive aspects of the paradigm shifts that are occurring, but a lot of people are concerned about the loss of socialization that children are facing, and concerns also for if the needs of special needs children are being met. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, of course. So I think there's definitely online education is not the silver bullet. As we move, into the fourth industrial revolution, if you look at the skills that the likes of WEF say that we all need, it is very much around soft skills, creativity, problem solving, and the ability for these to be delivered through online only is certainly not the answer. I don't think anyone would say that online only is that. I think where we're potentially heading is a reimagination of that community aspect, in which potentially schools become more of a community heart center, around which online education sits in some capacity. Funnily enough, actually referring back to Cambridge University, everyone will have seen in the press, Cambridge goes online. And in fact, this was really badly reported. It's just lectures that have gone online. And the universities are still continuing with in-teacher classrooms. There's a huge amount of still that social aspect that's taking place as well. No one thinks that should just be the case. Quickly referring to children of determination or people with particular needs, it's actually very interesting to see some evidence coming out that autistic children are actually learning incredibly better online because they don't have the stress of the social interaction of the classroom. So it has to be a case-by-case basis. I think by introducing online education and by making this experiment happen, choice is only going to increase, and hopefully there'll be greater diversity in the market and more opportunities for people to be able to choose either online or at home.
Yeah, great. So we're nearly at the end. I'm going to throw out a question. We'll just go round robin if everyone can give a brief answer, which is following some of these questions. What do you see is the silver lining, the biggest silver lining of the situation, whether that's how people have responded or what the potential new conversations are? So we'll just go in the same order: Ruqayya, Kaveh, Amal, Ali.
Yeah, I've been searching for silver lining since the past 3 months and having discussion with my colleagues at the government. Well, I think the silver lining was the speed that we adopted in the past 3 months. It's something that would have been achieved in 10 years, that we were able to achieve it in 3 months. So it's something that we need to acknowledge. And we need to actually think that it's a positive. And another discussion was like when we were talking about the future of governments, and then we just laugh about it. Like we are living the future now. We are preparing for the future now. So these are things that we need really to keep in mind. Another silver lining is I think the way maybe we were working was not really sustainable moving forward in the future. Making governments and the economy pause a little bit and rethink of their model and think of reform and think of what is in the economy and the best interest of the people is actually something that we need also to think of as a positivity from this pandemic. So yeah, these are a few of them that I can think of. And of course, the bond that we have with our families now that we are home is something that I always keep telling my colleagues, enjoy it, because this time may not come again, and we will miss it, so let's make the best out of the situation.
Thank you. Wonderful thoughts. I like, we're living the future now. With my weird background, I apologize. Kaveh.
Thank you, Laila. I actually think the silver lining here, and I know I'm not alone in this, I in fact just read an article President Obama had retweeted a Vox article highlighting some of these things earlier today. I know you just touched on it at the end. For me, the silver lining here has been very, very personal. And I think many, many of us have experienced it. And there's a bit of a awakening of consciousness at a personal level that this crisis has brought on that we haven't talked a lot about yet, but I think is pervasive. And that is, it has forced us to, in some ways, slow down, reprioritize what is important, and reduce our sort of consumerist tendencies, focus on friends and family, feel a little bit less pressure, waste a little bit less time getting around, and so on. And it's helped us look after ourselves in a way that I don't think as an entire population, global population, we've necessarily been doing very well. And so a lot of the sustainability and sort of resiliency conversations we're having, I think are born out of the fact that by working at home and from home and schooling from home and simply reducing the transaction costs of modern life, we've had a little bit of a chance to reflect on what's important with a little less stress. And I think that's going to have ripple effects on everything we do. I hope, Ragaya, your last comment was great. Appreciate this because it may not be the same, but I hope that in some really key ways, we don't let all of this slip away. We've learned some things that we need to keep with us and not just go back to the old ways, if you will. That for me is the silver lining here. We may be seeing a sort of a genuine shift.
That resonates a lot with me, Kaveh. I'm a consultant and I'm often on a flight to another country where I spend 3 or 4 or 5 days a week, and had a conversation with my boss about when we go back to normal, will we be doing that again? And we both agreed, both for the reason that you both mentioned, because we've gotten used to working from home, our clients may be more used to that, and because we've spent more time with our families, maybe we're not going to be so willing to give that up. So thank you for that comment, for those thoughts rather. Amal.
Yes, so I share my colleague's sentiment here that, of course, this was a moment for pause. I would just, also shed light on how difficult this time has been. So while we've had the opportunity to pause and reconnect with family, reconnect with ourselves, we've also, it was a time to also be grateful for the things that we miss. Isolation is difficult. How we are as humans are communal. The need to socialize, the learnings that happen when teams are in an office together, not just meeting online, because you strike a conversation with someone, it opens doors, it has this whole other dynamic. And so I think for me, the silver lining is, again, the vulnerabilities it has exposed, the fragility of our society, including the good and the bad, how, over consumerism has made us, not look closely at the things that we're missing out on, and the transaction cost of the modern society, whether it is commuting, spending all those time on our phone, but we're not spending it on our phone as much, we're still spending it over Zoom. And so are we really reconnecting in the same way? And I think one of the great things, of course, of this pandemic that I've talked about was how quickly we adopted alternatives that we've been, especially in this region, that we're trying to push for, whether entrepreneurs are trying to push for, investors, things like fintech, health tech, things that will, ease the way we conduct our lives. And this crisis has increased the adoption of these technologies by far. We've seen that in online education, and how quickly we've shifted to online education, which was amazing because it opens the door for, like you said, you can be taught, you can learn anywhere at any time at your own pace and everything, but also the cost this has come at. And, now we're seeing the good and bad of it. How isolating was this online education experience, how taxing it was for parents who are trying to work at home and still tutor their kids and manage this whole thing. So I think as a society, people are exhausted. People are really tired of having their kids at home, and they're working at home, and they're not meeting teams virtually and managing your teams virtually and everything. Silver lining, again, that we have adopted solutions much faster that, could have taken us much longer, especially in the Middle East. So I think we have to weigh out the balances and learn from it. So what the good, and how to correct for the bad or the cost, and how to reduce the cost, and how to not go back. And my fear is that we all have short-term memories. So as soon as things open up and they tell you, no more COVID-19, we're done here, you know, how quickly are we going to go back to our old lives? And I think the most important thing, whether we see it as a silver lining or not, is that leadership and stepping up during this period was very important. And so whatever decision a leader is taking today, whether it's on a university level, within your teams in the private sector, on a government in the government sector, every decision, and when it comes to whether it's new measures being implemented or laying off employees, whatever difficult decision had to be taken and how it was taken is very difficult, is very important, and will be remembered, and people will be remembered for how they dealt with this current situation.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Ali. And let me just say, because Sajida will give last thoughts after you speak, Ali. It's been a pleasure to moderate the panel. Thank you, everyone, for the questions, and thank you, panelists, for your amazing answers. Ali, I'll give you the last word, and then Sajida will pick up.
Goodness, thank you. So for me, it's everything that everyone's already said, really. But I think it has to be that we just have to say that change is possible. This has been uncomfortable change, but what I've been talking to the team at Dubai Future Foundation is saying, well, this has been one giant change experiment. How can we replicate the positive elements of this? How can we potentially say, okay, well, never before in modern history did we ask everyone to stay home and not touch each other, but maybe we could ask everyone in the UAE not to drive their car for a week. Maybe we could do some positive things around the environment. And, you know, I think if anyone ever comes back to you and says, no, that's not possible, we couldn't possibly do that, maybe we will say, would you remember the time when we all had to stay home and not touch each other? So I hope that we can take the positive from it. I don't know if people are ready for that right now. I think we need a little bit more time for reflection and recharging. But if we can say it's been one giant innovation experiment, I'd like to see us replicate that in a more anticipated and planned out way.
You're on mute.
Thank you. I was on mute. Thank you so much, Ali, and thank you all the speakers. I'm going to, before I do the last words, ask Mohammed to please say a few words.
Yes. So I need to conclude with your all talks, your all exciting talks, that we need not only an agenda or sustainable development agenda, we need more strategic performance management in each country. And I need to remind you all with the Saudi Arabia experiment in containing this virus. They used their ADA entity. They have an entity called ADA. It's an entity for strategic performance management, which implement the strategic development goals of their agenda of 2030. So they are aligned. They are all have one purpose. That's how we should proceed as Harvard clubs. And we should put, yes, the sustainable development in the core of our attention, but we have to see how methods of implementation of this agenda in each country. And after this, we can answer the first question of governance is, where are we now? The current situation analysis. We have to analyze each country first, then see how can we develop it. How far are we from each goal of the 17 goals of the SDGs? Maybe the education, yes, it has been changed a lot, but we have to be not too extreme in saying that we have to do it all online or to do it all like old conventional ways. No, it has to be blended. It has to go according to our capacities of the school, according to our situation. Another thing that I will remind you all that we are in the middle of a public health crisis. Without solving this crisis, we will not have any economical development in the next period. So we have to focus and we have to support all the healthcare stuff all over the MENA region to contain this virus. Yes, it will be gradually reversing the situation to our old normal, but it will come. We have to be patient. I think we are resetting as if we are pressing a long press in your PC. So you are resetting the society overall. So I really need to thank you all for your precious talks, and I would like to see and meet all of you in reality in the soon future, inshallah. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mohammed. So on behalf of Harvard Club of the UAE, Harvard Club of Egypt, and the Oxbridge Society, we'd like to thank our panelists very much for sharing your perspectives and your insights and really opening us up to new ideas and remembering that, you know, even though this has been a trying time and there's been challenges with isolation, it does provide us with an opportunity to shift our paradigms. And for those of us who have seen this, and you know, parents have struggled with different elements, as have we all, from working from home, it's also been an exciting time to just reconnect with people in a new way. And this is one of those telling moments when you see who's here today. I don't know if we would have been able to physically get together today, but virtually it's very possible. So this, I think, is definitely one of the silver linings that I see that's come out of this pandemic and this event. I do believe that we'd love to have these conversations and continue to go forward. So please look out for more from us and let us know always when there's topics you'd like to discuss. Lastly, again, sincere thank you to Rukaya for, you know, providing us and sharing perspectives really on how much the government has done and is continuing to do. Kaveh as well, our IT guru, thank you again, and our data scientist. Amal, a pleasure to hear from you and to see that, you know, opportunities will inshallah open up. We have to keep that positive, forward-looking mindset. And Ali, of course, discussing education, which is my passion as well. And I think what I found particularly exciting, Ali, is that we need to see online learning as an opportunity. It actually opens more doors and provides greater access. It's about us making it about quality access. And, you know, look for things that are happening in the near future from all of us who are in this field to make it happen. Thank you also to Lila for moderating the Q&A and doing such a great job. And thank you all of you for being here and for joining us and for making our event a success. Stay well, stay safe, and inshallah see you all very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.